the Radleian community is amazing. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Simon Shaw. I'm an OR council member, former parent, Radleian Society, and one of the two executive directors of Salmons PLC. Hence why we're here in this building tonight. I want to welcome you. I think this is, I can't remember, is it the fourth or fifth we've had in this series? Whatever. Can't count. I'm the CFO. Struggle beyond one. But one of the things that's been so great about this is hearing some fantastic stories of ORs who've gone on to do some amazing things, started up businesses, and been incredibly successful, and also learned a lot of lessons along the way through perhaps some less successful moments in their careers. I think I'd like to welcome everybody in the OR community and former parents, but also specifically this time, I think we've got the Radley entrepreneurial group here. Hands up if you're an entrepreneurial group member at Radley. Go on a bit higher. If you're going to be successful, you've got to really go for it. Good, well, welcome. You may pick up quite a lot of interesting stuff tonight, I do. I think the only other thing I would say is, regardless of whether you see yourself setting up your own business in future or what have you, and you're sitting in the head office of a business with 45,000 staff globally now, by no means a classic startup. But the skills and attributes of the entrepreneur will serve you beautifully in any career you want to go for. It's all about how can I add value and make it happen better than it was happening before I started. So on that note, I'm going to introduce you to Sam Merullo, who's going to chair, facilitate, come away the group and introduce our entrepreneurs for the evening. So welcome.
Simon has slightly stolen my thunder, but basically reiterating or saying exactly what I'd like to say now as well. But firstly, it is great to be here, so thank you very much, Caroline, and Radley too, for putting on this series of events. And I think it's a series of 3, not 4, or 4, not 3. This is the third and last one, and I think it really does show that the college is looking beyond its sort of traditional stomping grounds of the army of banking, law, and dare I say it, Simon, maybe even commercial property as well. Which is a very good news, and I think business building in itself has always been a pretty murky thing. Certainly when I was at Radley, and certainly when I was at university, I had no idea how you would go about starting something. So what I want to try and do today, by using these 3 phenomenal success stories, is touch on what some of those building blocks might be to help someone start a business at a different point in time. But then also talk about some of those skills and risks that are involved too. And I think Sam, you're spot on right about the skills that are required. In many ways, the skills that are required in order to build a business are, frankly, the creation of your own luck. It's actually not relying upon others to do the work for you. It's about seizing an opportunity and making something good of it, being the agent of your own change, and then of course being the agent of all those people around you to change as well. It is of course, I think, about challenging the status quo. It's about being a disruptor. And that of course requires people or an entrepreneur or a business builder to think creatively, to concentrate on the execution of something rather than the process of something. So it's actually about getting something done and delivered rather than necessarily pushing pieces of paper around your desk. Samples. I can resist. I said to myself I'd have 1 ticket at Savills, but I've given 2, and I have no problem with Savills, I just enjoyed it. But I do want to talk about the risks involved in business building as well. So I think a question for the crowd: who has started a business? Put your hands up if you've started a business at some point. And who is thinking about starting a business? Who's pondering? Yeah, right. And who's generally curious? Perfect. I think that should help guide the sort of the questions and answers as well. Right. I think we have an interesting crowd here in the sense that we've got, and I'll get you all to introduce yourselves in a second. We have a business-to-business business, so a business that works on behalf of, or whose clients are effectively other businesses. We have a consumer-driven business, that's Sam Tucker, in Xander Gilbert, and then we have a mixture of everything in you, Henry. Why don't you, Henry, you just give us a potted history of your career to date?
My goodness. So, I'm Henry Reily-Collins. I would say I'm a hydropower engineer, an entrepreneur, if you like. I currently run 3 businesses within the hydropower space. And I never would have ever dreamed, if I could have dreamt of my future, it would have never looked like it is presently. I never thought, I didn't even know what hydropower was. I knew I wanted to be an inventor when I was at school at Radleian. I didn't actually know what an inventor was until an older brother of one of my friends said to me, I think you mean an engineer. So I then looked down what an engineer was and what was required of me and ended up doing engineering at Manchester University. Followed that through all the way into doing property development, mixture of things along the journey as well, from events management and putting on parties, but ended up in property development at the time of the renewables boom in 2007 or so. And I was a lead engineer for a property development of an old mill. Didn't know what the future held, but there I was looking at this power of the water running through this mill, and everyone's saying you need to do renewables, etc. And so I designed this hydropower system, and would I have believed it, that became my career. I thought I was going to go into property development, into event management, all these different things. But when people started saying, Henry, we want to do what you've done here, we want to do this to our building, we want to make our property green as well, suddenly I realized that this niche was opening up in front of me. And that's led me to where I am now. We're one of the leading hydropower agencies in the UK, and we're inventing turbines and maintaining them throughout the country, from Blenheim Palace up to the Manchester Ship Canal, some of the largest in Europe.
And it all started from having domain knowledge, real knowledge and understanding of a specialty, engineering, or inventing as you wanted it to be, initially. And it came from there in terms of domain knowledge. And then we have Sam Tucker. Sam Tucker, who started a business about 2.5 minutes after leaving, after Gordy, basically, his final Gordy. And how does a man, Sam Tucker, who has spent about 6 months in an office, go about building a business which has effectively disrupted, or at least aided, offices?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm still not sure, but I think perhaps that's the whole reason. It was for me. I left. It was much shorter.
Maybe explain what you do, what the business does in the first place, and then launch in.
Sure, it's a much shorter career, story. I left Radleian in 2019. As Sam said, worked for 1 year in a tech company in London called Paddle. 6 months of which were in their office. 6 months were remote, like the rest of the world during the pandemic. And then from there, that spurred me and the team today to build Common Surface, which is a new breed of work software, work OS, that's empowering employees and teams to plan how, where, and with who they work most effectively and most happily on a daily basis. And that can drive returns for the companies in terms of employee engagement, employee retention, real estate optimization, and much more. So I think it was really for me it was the contrast. 6 months into my career, the world around me was kind of thrown upside down. I saw the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things, and wanted to try and in the scary number of years left in my career, achieve the sort of the best of both worlds. And that's very much the kind of remains the goal of Common Surface today, to get the best of both worlds.
And Xander, how about you?
I can tell you a little bit about my move into the entrepreneurial world. It all started at Radleian, of course, probably in Gary Wiseman's classroom, which some of you I'm sure will be in. I think I had a natural affinity with maths, so I took 3 maths A levels because that was sort of the one thing I could do, and because I didn't know what to do next, I ended up doing a maths degree. And although I knew that I wanted to sort of be an entrepreneur, sort of do something entrepreneurial, actually partly that was because I actually had an entrepreneurial brother who is here today, who'd sort of started a business and sort of shone a light on that world to me. Although I knew I wanted to kind of go into that world, I just did the thing that everyone else on my course was doing, which was sort of sheepishly following each other into the investment banking sort of career track. And yeah, that sort of started me on a path of doing investment banking for a number of years. I sort of tried to escape that world because I sort of wanted to do something more entrepreneurial, but I sort of kept getting sucked back in. Along the way, I was involved in founding sort of financial, sort of an insurtech business, so sort of insurance and technology. But after about 8 or 9 years of the finance industry, I thought, right, enough is enough. And I took some time out to think about, okay, well, what actually really matters to me? Is it investment banking? I don't think so. There must be sort of a bigger thing for me to work on. And yeah, I took some time out. I was traveling.
But you took time out to think of a business idea, or did you take time out just to sort of re-energize yourself?
Somewhere in between, a sort of bit of both, a bit of self-exploration.
Did you think you were thinking about business ideas throughout your entire career to date? Did you always consider yourself, by nature, an entrepreneur?
I don't know if I thought of myself in those terms, but it was sort of definitely always something, always sort of batting around business ideas, working on projects. But yeah, it wasn't until maybe 4 years ago where I had a conversation with my cousin, actually, about the fact that we'd been struggling with various sexual issues.
Not together.
Not together. That's probably, I don't know if that's illegal, but yes, struggling with sexual anxiety. And my cousin confided in me that he'd been having the same issues. And we realized this was like a really powerful conversation. We sort of hadn't had this with anyone else before, with any man, with any friend, with anyone. And it was this kind of great weight sort of lifting off our shoulders, and we realized there was a seed of something really valuable. And fortunately, my cousin is from a family of psychosexual therapists, so we were very well placed to sort of delve into this world much more deeply. And yeah, we sort of started researching, and we realized sexual performance anxiety is something that, it affects pretty much every man in their life at some point, but we don't talk about it because we think we are uniquely broken, and it feels very difficult to talk about. Yeah, that was 4 years ago. It took us about a year to build the courage to actually start working on it and admit to the world that this is an issue that we were facing and that this is something that we were kind of committed to working on. So yeah, now and for the last 3 years, I've been working on Mojo, which is a sexual wellness app, and we help guys overcome erectile dysfunction, sexual performance anxiety, and it's an app. You can download it. It's in the App Store. Yeah, please give it a try. Yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and I'm sure we'll sort of talk more about it.
So you found a problem, it was a problem for you, and you found a problem and it was a problem for you, and you somehow, Sam Tucker, managed to stumble upon a problem at exactly the right time in terms of disrupted environment.
I think we were too early.
COVID. You think we're too early?
Yeah. It's very difficult to sell a solution to a preemptive problem. And actually, when we came up with the idea, I still probably had 12 months left of intermittent lockdowns and at least government guidance to work from home. That meant, this wasn't a problem. And then the perhaps immediate problem after the lockdowns were lifted were much more around kind of compliance and health, health security and things like that. Not actually how do we make this new way of working work for everybody. We were lucky that we could invest in, we raised some venture capital, which meant, we could keep going, we could hire good people regardless and keep doing research and keep building around it. But actually, without that, we wouldn't have been able to sell to anybody because the problem didn't exist yet.
Yes and no. I mean, you started at a time when office space was disrupted, and VCs, venture capital houses, who were investing in entrepreneurs and concepts, at that moment in time suddenly realized they were looking at a totally different paradigm. And actually, you were coming up with a solution at a time when most others weren't. And so they, looking to the future, believed in you in such a way, and rightly so, that they invested really quite a lot of money for you to develop this concept. What you're talking about in terms of actually too early means too early perhaps to deliver the sales. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. The customer problem didn't exist yet. It was a lot of the some really forward-thinking companies that we're lucky to work with and have worked with from the early days, like Multiverse and Dolby and Beamery. They looked ahead and they saw this was going to happen, and they started to work with us. But it's only even today that companies are starting to really understand what the opportunity cost to not adapting to the new way of working is, and then acting upon it. So, as I say, thankfully, because of the blessing and the curse that is venture capital, it happened. But I guess maybe conventionally speaking, we were early for the conventional supply and demand forces.
So what we're all talking about is the problem here. How is your problem, the problem that you initially identified when you sort of found yourself as this inventor type engineer, how has that evolved as the business has developed?
We've gone through transitions of moving further and further away from this dream idea of being the inventor and becoming sometimes an accountant, becoming an HR manager, becoming all the things I didn't really have an ambition to be at certain stages. And you have to roll your sleeves up and learn at every stage of the business. It's interesting actually, there's three of us. Xander has come out of business, learned some ropes doing that. You've gone straight into it from school. I've kind of tried a few different things and then ended up with something, and there's three different approaches, which is interesting. And the number of times I have wished, gosh, I wished I'd worked for a big company and knew what these terminologies were, knew what equity meant, all these silly things.
And how to write an email.
How to write an email.
An email that people will think, this is not done by some guy sitting in bed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which frankly, most emails I've received over the last 2 years have been pretty much written from bed, because everybody's working from home using common surface your software.
But it's really interesting hearing your side of the story, Henry, and you saying you wish you'd been at a corporate. Because I think there's a bit of the grass is always greener. Because actually, I'm looking at Sam thinking, I wish I'd worked in a startup and had that experience. So I think there's always a case of the grass is always greener. There's loads of different paths in.
I think grass is always greener is a phrase that's used a lot, and I use it a lot. It's a spectrum of how much do you want fresh eyes on something, so you actually then can innovate, versus actually some wheels don't need reinventing. And I think personally, I know it was we all laughed that it was only 1 year at Paddle, but I learned an incredible amount in that time that definitely facilitated much of what we've achieved today, and in fact built some relationships at that company that still serve.
Who was your first employee?
So my first employee was my boss from Paddle, and then the CEO of Paddle, after being a bit annoyed that I'd poached one of their best employees. Fortunately, they've got a couple of hundred more, so he got over it. Then also was one of our first investors. So it was, it's a nice story. I've actually, I think last month, just passed the point at which I've been this first employee's manager longer than they've been my manager. So we sort of swapped some notes and had a good laugh about that.
But it's incredibly compelling as well. I mean, I'll give you a bit of a background myself quickly as well. So I started off as a lawyer, very junior lawyer in a law firm. Whilst in a law firm, I spent most of my time thinking about the businesses that were our clients. And frankly, I realised I was probably one of the few people in a Magic Circle law firm to be thinking commercially, to be thinking about actually what are the commercial interests that are driving these decisions. And jumped ship with a friend of mine who I'd been at law school with, and went over to help him build his business in some respects, which was an endurance race event business which scaled rapidly for a number of years. And Then I jumped ship and helped build a carbon capture and utilisation business, so a technology-based business effectively, protecting intellectual property, developing it and commercialising it. And then I founded something called Scootfleet, which was a logistics business providing huge numbers of riders on bikes and scooters and mopeds driving around London, very often badly, and working for Just Eat, Deliveroo, Next, Zara, etc. And we sold that, and I'm attached to a VC and a mentor at the Founder Institute. And I think that's me, but I think the story what I was trying to come into is how important, Sam, given that you'd been at university for 6 months or something, a year?
3 weeks.
3 weeks, but during COVID. How important is university and how important is that first job? I accept paddle was incredibly important.
Well, I think so. The university. I did go to university for 3 weeks in between paddle, or sort of simultaneously while starting Common Surface. Xander, you mentioned the kind of the period of ideation and when you settled on the idea. I think I definitely also was kind of obsessed over the idea and how important that may or may not be. There was also a period of, am I actually going to do this? And I wasn't sure. So I started university at the same time, got 3 weeks in, didn't much enjoy sort of Zoom lectures, and heavily policed student halls. And then started to get some traction with Common Surface, so dropped out and been negotiating with said university over the fees ever since. Otherwise, it's going to be they're trying to charge $3,000 a week, which I think is a little steep. So if we count the 3 weeks,
Double your annual revenue.
very good. Not true, but very good. I think, but then if we don't count the 3 weeks, which is probably fair to everybody who actually has a degree, I certainly haven't found it to be a problem that I don't have a degree. We've got our team sort of about 15 people. I think about half of them have degrees. I don't really know. It definitely in terms of the kind of. So for me, in my sector and what I'm doing, no, it hasn't been an issue. But I think the way I think about it is everybody shouldn't do one thing. Not everyone should be an entrepreneur. Not everybody should go to university, and certainly not everybody should be a banker, lawyer, etc. that we discussed before. And I think perhaps certainly when I was at school, it was very much you pretty much have to go to university.
Maybe that's a question for the audience, those people who do employ people. To what extent is, for hiring at least, is a degree still important? And has that changed over the last few years? Do you still look particularly for a degree? Hands up if that's a yes. Hands up if it's a no, not necessarily. Okay, interesting. So there's some fluctuation and change. And some people here probably only employ from Radley, so if I were you then, I would go and speak directly to them. I think definitely degrees are less important in my experience than perhaps they have been. I think COVID has been a disruptor of that.
I mean, one of our first customers was you and Blair's startup Multiverse. They got about 900 people doing some really interesting things with degree apprenticeships, and there's always going to be a huge importance on university degrees, but it's just there are increasing options, and one should consider all the options rather than just necessarily going down the trodden path.
I've always employed on enthusiasm. Yeah. I've just taken on a historian into an engineering business. He studied history at Durham, and I thought, what am I doing here? But there was something about him, something about his enthusiasm that just rode through all of it compared to all the competitors that were going for the position. And I just thought, you know what, I can teach you everything you need to know, and everyone, the rest of the team can as well, but what's going to ride you through the troughs, through the peaks, is that enthusiasm, and it was infectious, so I took him on, and that's something we really look for in our team as well.
And you also think that actually this is someone that's going to go to bed and start thinking about our business.
Absolutely.
You also probably think about your business every time.
Probably. No, but I totally agree with Henry. I think there is, the important thing is like a hunger to learn. If I look at my team, probably half have degrees, half don't. There's an element of it, it depends on the role that you're going for. I'd say all our most brilliant software engineers, for example, don't have degrees. They've just they've just learnt their craft in their bedroom. Oh, I don't know what. Yeah.
I'm having to bite my tongue.
It's very difficult not to make puns in this industry. But yeah, so I think it really kind of depends on the role, but there's by certainly no means a prerequisite.
But is the value to someone that's actually thinking constantly about the business, or is effectively working 365 days a year? Go on holiday and you come up with ideas. I know when I started a business, and rather than being an employee, the difference is that I'm constantly thinking about it. And if you can employ people with that same sort of energy levels, that same sort of enthusiasm, then, as you said, it's infectious. That's probably
When you start having dreams about it, that's always when it's either a good or increasingly, or maybe a bad sign.
yes. And how important is this idea? I mean, lots of people sit around saying, well, I'd like to start a business, but I don't know what to start, or I've never thought of something. How important is that idea?
I feel that I was thinking about this on the way here. Actually, to have a hazy dream is I feel is one of the prerequisites in a way, and to know. And I say hazy because it does shift and it does change, and you need to remain agile and be open to pivoting if market forces change, or if new ideas come about, or if you find someone else who's got a better idea in your team. You have to be that agile. But to have a hazy idea of what you're about, what the theme of what you're trying to do in the world, I think that's pretty important. And that's that bit that you think about at night, I suppose. Am I heading in the right direction?
I definitely think that people put too much, perhaps. Well, I think I certainly put too much of an importance on the idea itself, and actually, I was waiting for a brilliant idea, and then the rest was just going to look after itself. Sort of definitely the other way around. You do need a good idea, but then the hard work starts. I think in terms of Xander, in the year and a bit that I've known you, I've always been very impressed with just how much you really do care about the problem you're trying to solve, and I think that definitely kind of, if you are in that situation, which I do count myself in partially, there's an added drive and motivation and ability to storytell, and which is vital for hiring and raising selling and raising capital.
No, definitely. For me, feeling highly motivated by the impact that our mission is having on the world is extremely important. When it's sort of a November morning and things haven't been going well, and someone's handed in their notice, it feels very important to feel very motivated by the mission that you're working on. I think, for me, that has felt very important. Not necessarily the specific idea, but the feeling very motivated and thinking I have a duty to make this work for our customers.
Maybe it's worth right now just stepping back a second, and one of you guys, feel free to put your hand up, which, do you want to just, if you were starting a business, you come up with this idea, and on that idea point, I'll just add one other thing. I tend to believe that actually ideas are commonplace. It's about how you execute something, it's about driving it forward and doing something at least as good as someone else. Better, strive for better, but actually it doesn't necessarily need to be better. You need to have some common differentiators, but you need to strive to be as best as someone else in the marketplace. It's a low threshold perhaps, but it does show you that actually you just need to get on ahead and do something and execute. Why don't we just take a step back a second and just think about the different stages in building a business? So you come up with this idea, and then what other stages are there in terms of, and you've gone through it most recently, Santika. Is it ideation? Is it build test?
I think so certainly it depends whether or not you're going to go down the venture route like we did. That definitely dramatically changes.
Raising from venture capital, raising from funds who might.
That dramatically changes sort of the shape of the growth curve, your ability to deploy said capital and hire a team. That's the route we went down, and I can speak to that. I definitely not the person to speak to if you want to bootstrap your business or build it the old-fashioned way or the proper way perhaps. For us, ideation. We had a long period of testing where we just tried to speak to as many people as possible. It's where under the guise of speak to as many people as possible, validate the idea, start to curate a bit of a list of who our early adopters might be. If that's in fact Sam, when we met, when I tried to sell to you without realizing you didn't still have a business, you left the business that you worked at, and we became friends from there. So I think there was the ideation phase, and then that's when we raised our first capital from, in fact, lots of these people we'd done the testing on, and lots of our early customers. And that was maybe perhaps when you kind of bring a product to market, and that's when we brought a product to market, proved it was real, proved it worked, and raised an additional couple of million from seed round, and then that's when we actually had to get onto the making money bit of running a business, which has been a slow process ever since then, hampered by various lockdowns and lots of other challenges, but just about getting there.
Was yours a similar process, Xander, in terms of building, in terms of processes?
Yeah, I'd say pretty similar on the whole. I think for me, sort of step one after stumbling on what I think is an idea or what we thought was an idea is to test the riskiest assumptions. So think about, okay, well, why is this a rubbish idea? And work through all of the things that you're assuming for your business to work, and try to disprove all of those assumptions. I try and identify why your business will fail, and really kind of look at it very critically and try and rule out all of those, and just sort of keep ruling those out until you can't, and then that shows that you're kind of on the right lines, and you can sort of take it to the next stage.
The one thing we keep on hearing, you hear anybody that's started a business, is this idea of testing. I mean, presumably it's most applicable in your business when you're building something that is physical, and every circumstance potentially is different, every environment is different to the next or the last.
Apply it to the business as well, in that sort of you need to constantly test what you're producing, but also constantly test what you're doing with the business. I'm a big fan of Peter Thiel, 0 to 1. I recommend it as a book if you're trying to think if you want to go into entrepreneurialism. And it's about striving for a sort of a big leap in development in what you're doing, not just making minor improvements and heading globalizing laterally, but making a big 10x development. And there's a line in there which is, a good business is constantly redeveloping itself, constantly in a phase of startup. And I like that because I always feel that we're constantly doing, testing, retrying again, going back, applying it to the business model, applying it to the product as well, and starting again.
Never resting on its laurels.
Never resting on its laurels, probably never making any money because of it, but there's constant, we must keep moving forward.
If you're under 22, you can also apply for Peter Thiel's fellowship, where they personally give you £100,000 as long as you promise to build a business. You don't have to spend it on the business, but there's kind of an incentive to do something different and build it. It's quite hard to get.
And if any of you get it, then there is a fee attached.
Yeah.
I actually only just found out about this and have applied, but haven't heard back yet.
Fantastic. This testing is important. And I think we've all sort of been involved and heard about businesses over the years, probably us in particular. When someone says, listen, we're now year 1, year 2, 6 months in, and we are sticking by our business plan. Our business plan, we've literally ticked the boxes of the business plan. That gives me the shivers. It makes me really nervous, because it means that actually in doing so, what someone's not doing in building a business, what someone's doing is slavishly adhering to some sort of false regimen that they had written themselves before they knew anything. And actually what they're not doing, what they are doing is shutting themselves off to all the data points, all the information that is coming their way, that is actually should be helping them drive the next stage of the business. And it's by using those data points in order to drive forward the next monetization journey, the next product iteration, the next stage of the business. So I think at all points in time, data and analysis of customer feedback, of are the fish being saved in your case, in your current business, that's all driving the way forward. Is that something you guys sort of agree with, or even better if you criticise it?
Unfortunately, I don't have any criticism of that. I'd say it definitely applies in the world of technology, in startups, in high growth companies. I think maybe in more traditional businesses, maybe a business plan is appropriate. But I think in an environment where you're operating in extreme uncertainty, you don't know who your customers are, what exactly they're looking for, how your product is going to work for them. then you just can't expect to stick to a business plan. So you'll constantly be learning, via user research, customer interviews. You could be running, you're hopefully running numbers of experiments each week, offering kind of different versions of your product. So you're constantly learning like what does and doesn't work, and changing your direction on the back of that.
One thing I found out probably a little too late is you can the most, well, in my business, the most expensive thing is building the software, is paying the engineers who all need lots of money and it takes a long time, etc. Is the product. You can test things that you haven't built yet. We regularly advertise for new features and kind of see the response, and then sign people up to a wait list. We raised quite a lot of money on designs. The product wasn't built yet openly. We weren't pretending it was built, but and that was fine. But I didn't. We spent a lot of time, a lot of money building an initial version that was never used, and then ended up making all the progress with just designs and tests that we'd run. So you can get a long way without. The testing is more than just small iterations. You can actually kind of even start the business just on these small ideas and tests and designs.
I tried to move into the app business at one point. I'd been doing hydropower a long time, and I thought I'd try this thing that people are talking about, people are walking into and picking up the next day. I mean, I'll give this a go. And like you, we started off with bits of paper stapled at the top with screenshots printed onto them, and we went up to people in the street, put it in their hands, and asked them to walk through step by step as if it was the app that they were turning. We couldn't afford to develop an app at that point, and that's kind of how you can really start things going. Yeah.
Interesting. I might just jump back a second and just say something. When an email went round the Radleian Society, and I got an email from, or a LinkedIn message from a veteran of Radleian who's 78 years old, who's a very successful businessman, has his own foundation. And he wrote me a very long email, and in it, he provided some sort of guiding advice and light for anybody that might be thinking about being an entrepreneur. And I have to say, I find it very difficult not to almost read it out verbatim. So he says, an entrepreneur needs 3 things. The first thing he needs, until he's 78, he's still very conscious of the status quo. He says, forgive my use of the male pronoun. The first thing we need is courage. The courage to give up a job earning him a decent salary, to throw himself out unpaid into the unknown, in the hope that he catches the trapeze when it swings past. If he doesn't, he'll fall and get hurt badly. The second thing he needs is obsession. I've never met a successful entrepreneur who's not obsessive to the point of boredom about the goods, product, or service he's offering. And the third streak is madness. When he comes up with his brilliant new idea, he'll be able to consult the experts. Experts are experts in what worked yesterday. Something new and different, which may work tomorrow, upsets them because they would need to learn something new themselves if it works. Consequently, they'll rubbish the entrepreneur's idea. It takes a streak of madness to go ahead with an idea that all the respected experts are telling you you will fail. Those 3 things, courage, obsession, and the streak of madness, are what it takes to be an entrepreneur. If you don't have all 3, it won't work. What do you think, guys?
I think,
Spot on.
Very accurate. I think when I told my parents that I wanted to make an app for erectile dysfunction, I think they thought I was pretty mad. And in fact, like most of my friends. But having said that, I think some people sort of did understand it, even if they weren't able to sort of admit it to me.
Yeah.
But definitely, it took, I think, a bit of combination of kind of courage and madness to feel okay about talking to the world about that. As I said, perhaps it wasn't that courageous. It took me a year to actually talk about this. On the note of courage, I think one thing to say is, for most entrepreneurs in the world, it absolutely takes a lot of courage, because they might be leaving good, stable jobs, like other kind of pre-existing opportunities. I think I was in the sort of lucky position that I'd been working in a bank, and I'd managed to sort of build up a bit of a kind of capital buffer that I was able to take a year out. and have the time to think about what I wanted to do next and take this leap. So for me, it wasn't as much of a leap. And it's one thing we should probably all acknowledge that it was like most people here went to Radley and have lived privileged lives. And even if after the end of that sort of my year of working out what I was wanting to do, even if it all went wrong, and even if it all still goes wrong today, the reality is I can go live in my parents' attic, and the wheels aren't going to fully come off. So I think we should all acknowledge that we are in that sort of solid position where we perhaps don't need as much courage as some other entrepreneurs in the world out there.
I relate a lot to the madness. Very much so, and my advice would be
he's the man wearing a cravat.
Surround yourself with people that are good to can distill the madness. And I think it's you need to be on the edges of different ideas all the time, as he captures there, and I think that's pretty important.
But I think I agree with what he said. I think what's really hard is trying to work out who these experts are, who to listen to. Is that person an expert? Should we discount him because he's an expert? Whose opinion do we value? When you start something, everybody's got an idea. How do you begin to sift through those ideas to provide the sort of future iterations of the business?
I think I definitely resonate with the experts, the data. There's a quote I quite like. One thing about the only thing that's true of all data is that it's all in the past. And I was definitely in the category where we consulted the experts, and a lot of people. There were definitely two camps. Facebook was saying, burn your suit, move to Bali, we're knocking down all our offices. Goldman Sachs was saying, you all better be back in tomorrow, or you're sort of fired. And it's particularly in the early days, not everybody saw the world in the same way that we perhaps did. And there were definitely also a big cohort of people who said, who the hell are you to be the person to try and solve this? And maybe they're still going to be right, but regardless, I'm glad I didn't listen, because it's been a fun 2 years.
I'm going to touch on that, and something that jumped to mind there in the who are you, who are the expert. Imposter syndrome is horrific when you're being an entrepreneur, and even if you're not an entrepreneur in the workplace or anything like this imposter syndrome. Do I know what I'm talking about? Am I good enough to make this statement? Do I, am I asking the stupid question? All of the things. And a lot of entrepreneurialism is about that. You've got to be your self-driver. You've got to think about the things that you say to yourself and how you talk to yourself. And if you're there going, oh, how could you do that? How would you be so stupid? Somebody said to me once, would you ever talk to your own team in that way, the way that you talk to yourself? And that really helped. Just pull yourself out of that imposter syndrome and actually, you've got this. You have got this.
Sam, talking about, we've talked about fake it till you make it a lot. To what extent is that important?
I think there's definitely a, less maybe fake it till you make it, but I think, the first person you have to convince it's going to work is yourself. If you can't convince yourself it's going to work, you're not going to convince anybody else that it's going to work. And to do that, personally, I definitely, err on the side of, extra confidence and you perhaps, youthful exuberance has been said once or twice. But if I wasn't leaning more towards that side, I wouldn't, I wouldn't convince anybody to work for us. I wouldn't convince anybody to buy the software. I wouldn't, not that I do that, now that's not all me anymore. But yeah, so it's an interesting balance to avoid the imposter syndrome.
So it's interesting. In many ways, the first round of building a business is being a visionary, having courage, having conviction, but also being a good storyteller, telling the story so that other people can jump on your Noah's Ark and come on this journey with you. But then suddenly you've perhaps raised money. I'd love to touch on raising money after this, but you've suddenly raised money. You're suddenly employing people. How then is the transition from being basically a fake it till you make it type salesman? How do you put your snake oil behind and suddenly build a business with people and suddenly be a manager, Sam Tucker, of people who are older and potentially a little bit wiser than you?
Well, it's a very, very good question. Yeah, I think definitely I've got some people on the team who are twice my age, which is, but I think in a way actually it forces me to be a good manager in that I would have to be utterly ludicrous to try and tell them how to do their job. Therefore, because they've been doing it for 20 years and I've been doing it for 0 years. So it forces me, without even thinking about it, to just really lay out what needs to happen in order to kind of move us to the next stage, and then trust them to to kind of execute on that. So in a way, it's been a bit of a blessing. I think if you can convince them to work for you in the first place.
Henry, you've had a similar thing, presumably.
I'm thinking about trust in that. Being able to trust others is really important. And a lot of people have said to me, Henry, we wanted to work for you because you put so much trust in us straight away. And I think that really helped to kind of cross that boundary of if you trust them, they'll trust you in return, and you can lead in that way. But yeah.
So that's one of those values that actually are inherent, should be inherent in someone building a business, because if there's lack of trust, people simply won't work in the same direction as you, and that's going to make your life much harder. How then, when you're managing lots of people in an office, do you have time to think about strategy? Xander, do you want to take that?
Yeah, very difficult one. I think, so much of sort of startup life is thinking about what's happening right now or what's going to happen tomorrow, and it's very easy to kind of lose sight of the long term. And I think we actually deliberately try not to think too much about the long term, just because everything changes so quickly.
You don't get tomorrow right, you might not make it to the long term.
Exactly. Yeah. When your money, no, it's absolutely right. Like your money, we have a certain amount of money, and the ordinary state of affairs for startups is, you are going bust on this date, and you can see you've got you may have a year or 2 years or 6 months of runway, it's called, until you go bust, and you either need to raise some money or do something extraordinary in that short period of time, otherwise you're dead. So basically, much thought going beyond that end of runway date, your death date, is pretty much wasted thought. So the strategy tends to be, how are we going to survive? How are we going to survive in the short term, or how are we going to do something big in the short term?
I was going to say, this is the madness that I refer to. You're constantly being pulled from what I should be doing and what I have to do. And you talk to any business management advisor, and they say, well, you should spend 70%, you're a director, 70% of your time should be on the business, not working in the business. And it's just not real. And and so you start working on the business, and suddenly you realise all the eggs are being dropped, and you're back in again.
Utopia that rarely happens.
Yes. So yeah.
I think that's really hard. We just talked about obsession, didn't we? I mean, Miles Borland talked about obsession, but actually suddenly you can be operationally obsessed about our logistics business, and suddenly Hassan having a shit on the doorstep of number 26 is a problem, and it's an operational problem that suddenly requires help. How's your training? Who's going to clear it up? All those other things that need to be managed on a daily basis. But actually, what you're doing is actually doing it at the expense of the business. You're not actually driving the business forward because you're managing. Why have we only got 20 men rather than 15 men, or 50 men turn up today? So I think you're right there. This thing about being this sort of salesman to being an operator, a manager, a visionary. When you're hiring, and very often once you've raised money, you need to hire a number of different people quickly, relatively. Not all of them work out. And how long do you remember the day that you first had to get rid of someone?
I remember it very well. It was probably definitely up there in the top 5 worst days. We haven't let that many people go, but in the occasions that we have, it's pretty much always been, we've made a mistake in hiring. We've hired the wrong person, not that they haven't tried or that they've done anything wrong. We just haven't hired the right person for the job, or the plan's changed, and you've got to just have to have a really tough conversation, and of course treat people well, treat people fairly, because that matters.
And VCs, most VCs would probably, if you only VCs here, anybody that's involved in investing in businesses, do you think it's fair to say that actually most businesses probably sack their first person too late?
Oh, we're going through lots of these tough conversations as the market changes at the moment, and we find that it depends on the CEO. Like, we have some CEOs who are genuinely terrified of firing people, and we've given them a list of people they need to fire, and they haven't done it. And then their head gets on that block. And then others who are very, very good at it.
Too good sometimes.
It's a real challenge. I don't think you can be too good. I think the sooner you get in there and make those decisions, the easier it is for everyone.
Fine line between being a savage and actually thinking about the business itself as a person in itself.
It's a horrible thing to have to do. Yeah, it really is.
A couple of things that people told me that really helped. So in the build up to doing First of all, after you, the first one was much easier, and that's true. There's lots of things there. And secondly, I think perhaps the most helpful was it's no fun doing a job you're not doing well. So actually, quite often it really is putting somebody out of their misery, and then you're giving them an opportunity to move to a different role where they can excel and they can really enjoy it. So, kind of framing it like that. Perhaps it's different if it's a bunch of layoffs and there are a whole load. We fortunately haven't had to do that, but there's a whole set of different advice for that. But I think definitely hire slow, fire fast is the only way of doing things.
I'm working very hard on firing myself at the moment. That's my next plan at the moment. I realise that I'm the one that's tripping things up, and if I can get myself out of the way and put the right people in place, it'll be a lot smoother.
You said you've done that with one of the strands very recently.
One of the companies I did, I came back having had a bit of a break and realised that actually exactly that, the quickest way to growth was to kind of remove myself from the equation. I found another company who was working this is the maintenance business for the hydropower. It's very easy to get, protective, they're your baby, you've helped them grow, you've done all the design, the brand of the shirts, all of it. And I realized that wasn't where my heart was at. It was just a means to an end, and I needed to just let that side of the business, let someone else take that over. And that has been the best move I've made recently. We suddenly went from 6 people up to 42 people very, very quickly. So just in one simple. And I found that along the journey, actually letting go a little bit of some of the things that we hold on to so dearly can actually be the biggest steps that you make.
I completely agree. I think it's very easy to make business building and entrepreneurship feel like a very sexy environment where you're hiring, firing people, you're raising capital off people. But actually it's tough. It's really tough. It can be very tough. What have been some of your toughest days or weeks or periods? And how close do you think the business has come to collapse? How many times?
For me, the toughest periods are when we go through periods of low or no growth. And this is very scary for a startup, which kind of it relies on growth. Growth is the sort of rocket fuel. If you're growing, you're exciting to VCs, you're excited for employees that are part of the business. It's good because you've got more money coming in, most likely. So when growth slows, it's very scary because you notice the mood of the company dips. Your investors are less interested in you. Potential future investors are less interested in you. So, and you can kind of tie it to your sort of sense of identity. You feel like you're impotent when you're not growing, and so
Not the pun there.
Can't
let that one slide too easily.
I'm announcing a different.
So I think it's no sort of specific terrible day, but it's just sort of when you have real sort of periods like that, you just notice in the mood of the company is more difficult, morale, sort of people become more difficult, and usually that will become a sort of time where sort of more people issues arise. But inevitably, hopefully, at some point kind of growth will reappear, and then you just notice it sort of lifting up and and everyone kind of coming out of that mode.
What about you?
Another great book, if I may, that I lean on when things are really tough is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And that helps just put things that I'm dealing with in a kind of mere shadow. He talks about having to walk in one day and fire 5,000 people all in one, that sort of hard thing. But for me, a particularly tough time that has not very long ago, my business has been very dependent on what the government are up to. They move the goalposts about the renewables. One day we've got subsidies, one day they've decided they're not, the next day the electricity's high in the roof. And just a series of unfortunate, miscalculated, impossible to have done so. When the government moved the subsidies, a series of clients dropped away. And I had to walk in one day and face my team we were just 12 at the time, but I had to face a team of 12 and say, this is completely out of my power. We have an option now of either just closing the business, or if I can ask you all to work with me for free, alongside me for the next, I don't know how long, and this was the beginning of lockdown as well, we might just make it through. And I was crying, and it was really awful, and I felt so bad because it's literally just like that. I had to wake up and tell these people they might not have a job. That was tough, but we came through.
And you'll have tough times again.
Oh yes.
And what about you, Sam?
I think for me it's probably actually more in the very early days when we still put quite a lot on the line. Chosen not to go to university. Started to take some people's money, and it was unsure. We weren't sure whether it was were we ever going to get our first customer. Was lockdown ever going to end? Was our vision for the future of work actually going to be what? Realise how much of that kind of could we control, and just that that's when the doubt starts to creep in, and it's really important to have other people around you who also believe in it, and you can kind of all hunch together. So I think in some of those early days when there were more government government guidance to work from home, suddenly you don't have a product anymore temporarily. That was probably it for me.
Interesting. What questions do we have from? And particularly sharp questions that we can try and destroy the panel with. But any questions at all from the audience?
At what point do you issue share options?
At what point do you issue share options?
I did so immediately, first employee.
I probably did so too late, in a way. I had some great team members and didn't necessarily see where it was all going to go and didn't know when to issue share options until very recently I've started understanding it. So I would say learn early on and then make your plan from that. But yeah, you finding that's helping drive the team?
I think a little bit. But particularly with some of the more senior, maybe some of our more sort of senior team members who perhaps can we can use it as an incentive for them to maybe take less base salary, or they can take more of a short-term risk on their on their base salary in return for a more healthy chunk of options. But I don't think you've got to pay people properly. There's no two ways about it. So it hasn't made as bigger impact as I think perhaps is sometimes hyped for us at least.
I'd say we offered it sort of straight away, so everyone in our team has them, and it's actually something we try and talk about as much as we can. So we'll talk about we're about to do our next round of investment. If it looks like this. This is what it could mean for your share options. No promises, but this is very good.
Definitely something we do poorly. I think people don't. I mean, not sure. Yeah. I understand, but they don't necessarily understand what does it actually mean. When might it materialise? How does it? There's a whole load. That through to how does it work with the tax, because that's not simple. Yeah. So I think that's probably something we're doing poorly.
I think it's because it's complicated, because you don't want to make promises that you can't keep, and it's dependent on the market and the performance of the business. But within certain guardrails, we try and talk about it as much as possible, so that the whole team feels like owners of the business and treat the business as if they're owners, and they want good outcomes for the business because they know they're incentivized.
The part I've struggled with that is they should almost be aligned with targets of the business, and with entrepreneurialism, early businesses, they move very quickly, and so trying to pin targets, you're aiming for that, and suddenly you're over here. It's quite unfair. So you can't turn around and say sorry, you haven't worked hard, you don't get your options. So it's been a journey in learning that.
And some people are incentivized by the path of the journey, and some people are incentivized by cash, and early on you might make decisions on the basis of who that individual might be. Got a question over there.
Can you tell us about a time when you followed some advice which then turned out to be wrong?
Time you followed advice which turned out to be wrong, and if it's one of mine, Sam. Any of you?
You're ready for investment, was the advice. I couldn't have been further. It was several years not correct, and that's we can talk about investment a little bit, but that's been an ever-rolling beast of learning, and no matter how far I found I think I'm ready for investment, there's always some extra pile of questions that they're secretly keeping to put to place on me just when I think I'm on my last pennies in the bank account. So you're ready for investment. That was that's a dangerous advice for anyone to give anyone, I would say.
Anybody else on that one?
Yes, I would say, I spend a lot of time reaching out to advisors. Got lots of good advisors, some of whom are investors. They will often give completely conflicting advice. Some people will say, you must adopt this marketing strategy. because that will work and that is the best. And some will say, no, you must adopt this strategy, because everyone has, well, I mean, all our advisors probably run a business in a particular way, and they think that is the way to do it. And initially, this was a course of great stress for me, because I had two people who I thought were very clever and I trusted telling me opposite things. I think as I've kind of gone through this journey, I've realized no one knows what they're talking about, and you just got to have a bit of a stab, really.
Yeah, I think for me it's been definitely the beginning, and taking any advisor's word as gospel, or even these perhaps employee members of the team who much my senior, taking completely their word as gospel. But I think it's been a journey of nobody has as much context as you, so you have to make the decision. I think the second thing, kind of similar to your point, Xander, it's very, very difficult to give sort of stage agnostic advice, and particularly I found that our advisors quite often been early at big tech companies, Airbnb, Facebook, or whatever, and actually what works then when you were 100 people is different to when you're one person. And so I think you got to be really, that's probably the big. Everyone's obviously has good intentions, but the biggest risk in times we've been burnt is when we haven't paid attention to what stage the advice is relevant for, and even with things like this. Inevitably we're talking about lessons from all throughout the stages, and some will be very good advice to when you're on day one, but very bad advice to when you're on day year 3 or whatever. So I think that's probably been the biggest the most common theme of when we've got it wrong.
The microphone here as well.
Great. Thanks. But timing and luck is often the largest factor to getting any business off the ground. So my question is, if you were to start the business now, how easy would it be, and what would you do differently?
If you were to start the business now, how easy would it be, and what would you do?
I can talk to that quickly.
Please.
The name of the new company is ridiculous, but it's called the Fish Friendly Hydropower Company Limited. It's an awful name, but it's designed because of the lessons that I learned, and it's not for the client. It's actually for the people that have opposed or who are on the authorities that permit hydropower. And it's just from my lessons learned along the journey to try and start that or realize those lessons and to have the clients that we've had, and to understand the pain that people have for the need of our product. I had to do this for me. I had to do this journey, this 15-year journey, to get to what ultimately was my dream, to release this new innovation, a fish-friendly turbine. So it's for me, I had to go down that journey. Yeah.
Questions? Guy over there. Yeah. There's a microphone coming your way.
So when you first started your business, who did you originally go for advice before you built a network and investors and advisors? Maybe for Sam, if I were in your shoes, I'd be starting my business in only a couple of months, which seems a bit scary. Who did you go for advice? So
just repeat the question first. So who did you go for when you were initially thinking about and starting your business for advice?
Great question.
A very good question. I think the answer was anybody and everybody. Perhaps my kind of closest network of people I've been interacting with were not weren't very involved in startups. My potential kind of existing role models were much more in the kind of big companies, finance, things like that. So it was tricky. I think mainly it was people I had never met before. It was just emailing people, and maybe it was because of lockdown boredom, but a lot of people replied, and a lot of people were very helpful and ended up still very helpful to this day, and ended up in we didn't go to them for investment or for them to buy the software, but they ended up doing that without us even asking, and just going kind of honestly for help. A lot of people are really willing to give help. So the answer is as much as you can get in the early days, and I think the other takeaway is you'd be really surprised by how many people, no matter how fancy their job title is or how busy you think they might be, will probably help if you just ask.
And don't be afraid of using the Radleian network. I mean, you contacted me through that. It's the only time I've ever been approached through the Radleian network. And and also others, Freddie as well, and.
Yeah, anyone we could get our hands on, we tried to kind of just speak to them because we knew, we thought they might buy it, they might tell us something, they might introduce us to somebody, and from I can, some really important things that have happened, like first customers and, big bits of learning or hires or investment, I can kind of, I think about it, can trace back to, that one random email I sent to, whoever, and who then mentioned it to this person, and, word can spread quite quickly.
There's a question here, I think.
A couple of quick comments about raising capital. Always takes longer than you think.
Yes.
Many times longer than you think. And secondly, find the right capital, because I've had some bad experiences with businesses where they wouldn't follow on, and that made raising more money difficult. But I do have one question: is how have you found hiring salespeople? It's the most difficult thing in every business I've been in. How many of them you've fired already?
So
I've fired a lot of salespeople, so I want to go for it.
I'll repeat the question for the camera.
So the question was, how hard have you found it to hire salespeople? And then I completely agree with your comments about it takes longer than you think to raise money, particularly perhaps this year versus last year. And secondly, it's important who you take the capital from. It's not just about the money. We share are a big investor in Kindred, who are very good. I found it very difficult to hire salespeople. We finally got a very good one, but I think particularly this is an area where the stage really matters. They can quite often, salespeople by nature are good at selling themselves as well, so they can quite often convince you that they're gonna do amazing things for the business. And they also say, oh, I sold how many million to big businesses in my last role. It's very different selling a new bit of software that no one's heard of and no one cares about yet. So I think, so I think it's 3 in total, and they're the only people we ever let go. But today it's now actually working. But the person we have at the moment, they've been an advisor to the business for 13 months before they joined, and it took 13 months to kind of convince them because they were out of they've been the first salesperson before at three big companies. And most recently Ulife, that people might have heard of. I agree, and I think we've just got it right, but it took 13 months to hire them.
And raising takes a lot longer. But next to you.
I raise capital for small companies, so I wanted to ask, this does work, I wanted to ask the panel whether they could help the younger people here who are actually still at Radley, help persuade their parents that actually entrepreneurialism and the ecosystem out there is mature enough for them to go and take that bet rather than have to go down the big corporate route. Because that, I think, is probably one of the main issues that will be confronting the younger people in this audience, that when they get to the other side of university and they really want to go and do their idea, their parents, some of their parents won't necessarily understand that. So could you help them understand how the ecosystem has matured, the accelerators, the incubators, how it's ready to take people in?
So I think my parents think I'm still at university, so don't tell. I think there's a lot of I just knew zero. I knew nothing about it. We were, I think I've got emails where I saw somebody had raised £300,000. I was like, wow, that's amazing. That would make the business forever. And 2 months later, you suddenly found you've raised 10 times that without So I knew nothing about it and went in very, very, very blind. I think there's some things I didn't know about. Kind of maybe boring things. SEIS and EIS are fantastic schemes that make a huge difference for people who don't know. That's essentially for private individuals who invest in your business in the very early stages. They get very, very meaningful tax breaks, and so that massively reduces the risk. So you kind of take that into account when thinking about who you might have to convince. And I think perhaps the other thing is you maybe only you can get a lot of no's, and if you get one yes, you only need one yes. And that's maybe with more institutional fundraising, but even with the small when we raised our kind of smaller rounds, we got one person to say yes. They messaged 5 of their friends, and then 2 days later it was done. So but finding that first yes was tricky.
It's funny, one of the questions I was going to ask is, can you ever be a failure as a founder? And of course failure is defined in so many different ways, as everything is. but ultimately the process of building something, the process of being confronted by so many decisions and finding your path through that judgment process and dealing with everything from accountancy, from bookkeeping to HR to management to salesmanship to product, all those different raft of things makes you, by any stretch, a much better, more rounded person. So you could argue, quite coherently to parents who might say that actually this is a far better education than anything you may have spent money on, except Radley, of course. But the point remains there that yes, the ecosystem has changed dramatically. I think, I'm 39 since I graduated for ventures and for VCs, for investing in smaller businesses. Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of, one of the hardest things about it was just figuring out how to do it. How do you issue a share? When do you take the money? I had no idea how to do any of that, and suddenly, I had to speak to these sort of lawyer people, and it was very, very expensive. But there are increasingly lots of kind of templates and frameworks and repeatable seed legals, for example, repeatable ways of doing it at the very early stages. So I think even in the short amount of time I've been doing it, I've seen it get a lot easier, and it's a lot more approachable from a novice like I was.
Can I say something? My route was very different in the realms of, I haven't raised investment in all these years. We're about to look at it now, but it's been hand to mouth and also using grants. And there are a lot of grants out there. And if your idea is fixing a pain that the government is trying to solve as well, then there'll be something for it, or there'll be a competition around that theme: environmentalism, food, agriculture, and by going through the grant process, even if you don't win the grant, the questions that they ask you really get you thinking about, is this a business at all? Am I solving a pain? Can it make money? And all of these, and this process. And once you've done that, if you win the grant, fantastic. If you don't, then there are networks like the Business Growth Hub is something I've leaned on a lot. There's a government-funded business support network for entrepreneurs. And I remember the first day I walked in and they said, right, Henry, here's your marketing advisor, your financial advisor, your strategic advisor. I suddenly had an entire table of government-funded support, wanting to help me really realize this idea. I couldn't believe it. So there is help out there.
I think perhaps it's one of the rare areas that the government actually do a very good job, in that there are lots of R&D credits. There's lots of assistance programs for investment. There's really a lot of things out there, but it does take a bit of nous to know how to access them properly. So I think that's a really good point.
More questions? Caroline, do you want to? This is from the WhatsApp group, I think.
This microphone is for the cameras, by the way. We didn't actually have slides. I've got a question on the WhatsApp chat that we set up for tonight. It would be great to hear the panel's thoughts on the value of social media marketing via more traditional marketing. Is it really all about Instagram these days? So,
do you want to try and repeat the question?
So I believe the question is about social media marketing. And what is the value of social media marketing at the moment? Is it all about Instagram, for example? I would say the social media landscape is constantly changing, and what works today is different to what worked last year, and certainly very different to what worked 5 or 10 years ago. If you kind of go back 5 years' time, or 7 years' time, there were massive businesses being made on the back of companies just posting on their own social media profiles with what's called organic social media. So just managing their own account and just posting posts. So companies like Made.com, I think now gone bust, but went absolutely massive just on the back of organic social media, posting on Facebook, Instagram. Nowadays, the algorithms on Facebook and Instagram prioritize paid posts, so you have to basically pay for your post to feature on social media, and it's now a lot of companies have been driven by those paid social media posts. Our business is completely driven by not by social media, but by marketing on Google. So when guys don't know what to do because they're experiencing a sexual issue, they don't want to speak to their friends, they go to Google, ask Google, and we appear there. Almost all of our growth to date has been on the back of that, and we've paid pretty much we've paid most of our money that we've earned or got from investors to Google to drive that growth.
What about TikTok?
So TikTok is massively important for a growing number of companies. So for us, we're actually banned from advertising on TikTok because you're not allowed to advertise for erectile dysfunction products on TikTok. So that is a limiting factor for us. But we
how do you get around it? That's the question.
TikTok we haven't been able to get around TikTok, and actually we've had a lot of challenges getting live on Facebook and on Instagram as well. But we have now finally got an account manager at Facebook who's helping us navigate that, and so we are getting launched. It's a bit of a catch-22. We weren't able to get an account manager until we were spending a sufficient amount of money with Facebook. So it was a bit circular, but we've kind of now got there. And yeah, a lot of companies today, have kind of continued to grow purely because of these, paid posts on social media. And yeah, it's kind of scary how much of these tech companies spend on this marketing. I think between 40 and 50% of all VC investment money going to startups then ends up at either Facebook or Google via marketing. So yeah, huge amount.
And I think most people who start B2C businesses trip up on actually the cost of acquisition. You just, everybody's a great concept so long as you're spending what you spent in 2010 for acquisition. Now it's very different.
Yeah, so we spend £50 to acquire a new customer, and we basically just pay that to Google for someone to
but the value
sign
of that
up
new
for our
customer,
site.
as long as they stay with you for a long period of time, is great.
Yeah.
Should we do 2 more questions? How many? What do you think, Carolyn? You're in charge. 2 more. If we can get one from the Radley boys currently there, or a couple from there, there's one. Perfect. Go for it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
We'll do 3 more questions.
If someone were to ask one of your colleagues about your strengths and possibly weaknesses, what do you reckon they'd say?
I'm desperate to ask Sam Tucker this question. So we will.
Well, I'll guess you'll have to ask them. I think in terms of strength, I think I think definitely be something around kind of conviction and trust and enthusiasm. Your job is to keep them, you kind of have 3 jobs. Don't run out of money, hire good people, and make sure they're all working well on the right things. Kind of chief enthusiasm officer. So I think that would be one thing. Just the trust and the conviction in what we're trying to do, and that we're going to be able to do it if everybody executes on their set of goals. In terms of weaknesses, I think probably it would be around my ability to maybe definitely occasionally kind of avoid micromanaging. Being too obsession was mentioned earlier. If you're too obsessive, you get pretty annoying. And then maybe. And I think maybe just the kind of the time I'm able to spend kind of individually with one-on-one, like maybe I probably neglect that in some ways.
Your platform's going to help with micromanaging because they can be away and they can do their own thing elsewhere and get on with the job rather than have you here. It's going to be great.
Intentionality about where somebody works. Yeah, I'm much better talking about that than my own work.
A discount code for all our Radleians using Common Surface.
Go for it.
Maybe not though.
If you want to buy a fish-friendly turbine, however,
you can have it for free.
I can give a discount code for Mojo for any of the guys here who are interested. So you're more than welcome.
You don't have to publicly queue up.
Don't all shout at once. I'd say for me, what I found most useful and potentially my biggest strength kind of within the business is my ability to my desire to be data driven and to always listen to the numbers, and I've probably got Gary Wiseman to thank for that. I would say in terms of weaknesses and shortcomings, I'd say almost the exact same thing. Sometimes there's an over-reliance on the data and to sort of miss the bigger picture, to overlook important sort of broader things like the importance of brand, or kind of the aspects of kind of the relationship building kind of within the business.
Should we do the last question?
Definitely the hardest question to answer. Well done.
Tricky one.
Right at the back.
I've got a question about building out headcount for your company. In each of your individual startups, how central are you to driving the hiring and the increase of headcount, senior or junior, and depending on your answer, are you guys at all reliant on search firms or recruitment agencies to build out your teams?
I vaguely heard it. It's about hiring.
It's how involved are we in the hiring process, and how much do we drive that process, and are you at all reliant on search firms or recruitment agencies? Are you a recruiter?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely reliant. Yeah, I think I imagine, I kind of speak for all of us. Yeah, we're I'm deeply involved in the hiring process. And I think as a founder, that's like a really big part of your job. And is one of the most important jobs, because the people you hire are the ones executing your vision, and without that you're kind of going to get nowhere. So yeah, it's absolutely of vital importance. Try to avoid using recruiters wherever possible, to be honest.
Except this man over there.
I still like to phone about 3 times a day though. So.
Should be the final question here then.
Sorry, just quickly, just on the perspective, I'm not quite sure how many people you each employ. So could you just, how many people work with you?
So 15 at the moment.
15 with you.
Likewise 15.
42, but mixture of part-time and...
Okay.
Yeah.
So with 15, I can see how you are involved in the recruiting, but say you had 50.
I completely agree, and I think the reason I think it's so important to be involved in hiring the first 15 yourself is because those 15 are going to hire the next 50. So it's definitely not a perfectly sustainable strategy, but again, I'm quite a subscriber to Paul Graham's "do things that don't scale" idea in the beginning, because you set the foundations correctly.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you very much for tolerating us through this process. I'd love a round of applause to the panel, I think.
Really good.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to all of our panellists, particularly Reily-Collins, who stepped in this morning because Sam Hawley couldn't make it. You were absolutely brilliant. Sorry, no round of applause.